Civil War has been called many things. The American Civil War, the war between the states, the war between blue and gray, the war between North and South. If you're from the South, it's known as the War of Union Aggression. But anyways, April 9th of 1861, the Confederates fired on Federal Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor. That was the beginning of the Civil War. President Lincoln put out a call for volunteers to put down rebellion. Governor Austin Blair, who was the governor of Michigan, put out the same call for volunteers. And Governor Blair, what he did is mobilized a number of Michigan militias, and he formed the 1st Michigan Regiment of Infantry. Now, a regiment consists of 10 companies of 100 men each, with 3 officers. It goes from Company A to Company K. So a regiment would actually be 1,333 men. That was the initial regiment that Michigan sent off to the Civil War. As the war progressed, more troops were needed. So then Governor Blair mobilized the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Sequentially, each new regiment got a number, and it went from 1 all the way to what I'm going to tell you about the 24th Michigan. 24th Michigan, they started to recruit in April of 1862, and it wasn't until August 14th of 1862 that they were actually mustered into federal service. And when you mustered in, got sworn into the U.S. Army at that time, the federal forces at that time. They were commanded by Colonel Henry Morrow. Henry Morrow in his civilian life was a judge of the Michigan Recorder's Court. They trained at Detroit Army Barracks, which was somewhere down Jefferson Avenue. And on August the 29th of 1862, they were issued their regimental colors. By that I mean the citizens of Detroit presented them with an American flag. And on the flag was inscribed the 24th Michigan. Company C of the 24th Michigan was designated the color company. Now this was a high honor because they would be the company that carried the national colors in the battle. Also on the 29th, they departed Michigan. They marched down Jefferson Avenue to the foot of Woodward. There they boarded steamships. They went from Detroit to Cleveland by ship, and then by rail to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Maryland, and finally to Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., they were attached to the Army of the Potomac to guard the Capitol. And there they guarded the Capitol. They also did more training. On the 29th of September of 1862, they were ordered to march to Antietam, Maryland. I don't know if you're familiar with Civil War battles. Antietam was the bloodiest day in American history. 26,000 troops were killed, wounded, or missing in 12 hours. The 24th Michigan wasn't engaged at Antietam for the fight. They got there, like I said, on the 29th. There they reported to General McClellan, and they were assigned to a brigade that was commanded by General John Gibbons. That brigade consisted of the 2nd, 6th, 7th Wisconsin, 19th Indiana. During the Battle of South Mountain, September 14th, 3 days before Antietam, that regiment was engaged in the battle. At the end of the battle, General McClellan says those men fought like they were made of iron. From then on, they were known as the Iron Brigade. Now also, that brigade was the only brigade in the Army of the Potomac that consisted of all Western regiments. Anything west of the Allegheny River at that time was considered the West. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota were all Western states. So they were assigned to the Iron Brigade. Now the first time that they were engaged in battle was December 13th at Fredericksburg, Maryland. We were ordered to attack a Confederate artillery battery that was firing on Union troops. They attacked the battery, drove off the defending infantry, and forced the Confederates to withdraw their guns from the field. That was a tactical victory for the 24th Michigan. Unfortunately, the Battle of Fredericksburg was a Union loss. The next campaign that they were engaged in was May 1st through the 4th of 1863 at Chancellorsville. They were not engaged in a battle, but they were held in reserve. The next battle that they were engaged in was on July 1st of 1863. The Iron Brigade was marching down Chambersburg Pike towards a little town in Pennsylvania known as Gettysburg. They heard musket fire in the distance. They were ordered into a battle line, the whole brigade. 24th Michigan was ordered to attack McPherson's Ridge, which was held by a Confederate regiment. At that time, the 24th Michigan consisted of 499 men. At the end of the battle, they were left with 200 men left. At the end of the day's fighting in Gettysburg, there were 97 men left. They were commanded by a captain. They had lost 399 men. All of the field officers, all of the company officers, with the exception of one captain. That was what was left of the 24th Michigan at the end of July 1st, 1863. From then on, they did not function as a military unit again. They were used primarily as a provost guard or engineers. It wasn't until late in 1864, that a lot of the wounded came back to the 24th Michigan. Soldiers that had been captured and released by the Confederates came back. They had a total strength of about 350 men. They engaged that in the wilderness, responsible for Morehouse, Cold Harbor. First part of 1865, was relieved of active duty as a combat unit over to Camp Blair in Springfield, Illinois. There they were used to train moving crews and act as guards. President Lincoln was assassinated on April the 15th of 1865. His funeral procession went through Washington, Baltimore, and finally to Springfield, Illinois. The 24th Michigan acted as honor guard for the funeral of President Lincoln. They were mustered out of service on June the 25th of 1865. Of the 1,333 that originally mustered in with the unit, 200 Michigan soldiers were left there. So today, these fine representatives of Glenwood. Any questions?
My husband, Thomas Ackley, came here in 1852. He came here because the United States government wanted workers to survey the area around the Great Lakes, Michigan, Huron, and Superior. When the survey was over in 1858, he stayed in this area, which was known as Nankin Township. I was born in a log cabin right where the roads, Palmer and Wayne Roads, cross today. We built our home nearby in 1860 and raised 3 children. Since the house still stands on Glenwood, most people probably pass it by today. There were these beautiful chestnut trees that grew to be over 100 feet tall. They were beautiful. Our children grew, prospered, and went on to lead wonderful lives.
Dr. Alexander Collar, and I want to tell you a little story about the 24th Michigan, very briefly. When war broke out, 1861, the Union Army met a great deal of disaster, particularly in the first battles, Manassas, and in the Peninsula Campaign, the 7-day battles there. In addition, General Grant in the West, although he had a victory in Shiloh defeating General Johnston, it was a high cost to both sides of over 20,000 casualties. And so President Lincoln, in July of 1863, called for another 300,000 volunteers for the Union Army. Michigan was given a quota of 6 new regiments. Quickly, those 6 regiments filled of men who volunteered. at the encouragement of his wife, Governor Austin Blair agreed that he would sponsor more regiments than what was required of his state. And so the 24th Michigan was born. In July 15th, 1862, there was a huge rally in Campus Martius in Detroit. I was there attending that rally. And from then, the 24th began to start recruiting men. By August 11th, they had their full complement of men and officers. Judge Henry Morrow was chosen as the colonel of the regiment. The surgeons were then chosen. There were 3 of us who served with the 24th. The chief surgeon was Dr. Henry Beach. He was a graduate of the Albany Medical College in 1841 and then moved to Coldwater, Michigan, where he set up his practice. He will serve as chief of the surgeon until nearly the end of the war, when, because of ill health, he was forced to resign in April of 1865, just days prior to General Lee's surrender to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. He will return back to Coldwater and continue his practice after the war. The first assistant surgeon was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Charles Smith. He attended medical college in Berkshire Medical College in Pittsfield, Maine, for the first year in 1851. And then in 1852, he went to Dartmouth College, where his thesis upon graduation was the treatment of pneumonia by bloodletting, which was a common practice at the time. Thank goodness we no longer do that practice of bloodletting. He actually was 39 when he joined the Union Army, and he had his practice in Bell Branch, which is now known as Redford. But he didn't survive long in the service. By February of 1863, he was already gone and resigned. As I said, my name is Alexander Collar. I was born in New York in 1822 and attended medical school, and then moved here to Wayne, Michigan to start my practice. I started actually under the guidance of Dr. Hume, who was already here in practice. But Dr. Hume passed away in 1852, and I assumed his patients at that time and had a very outstanding practice at the time. When war broke out, I was hesitant to join the service and waited. But after the rallies in Detroit and Campus Martius, I got the fever, like everyone else, to join the Army to protect our country and our Union. And so I joined as the second assistant surgeon for the 24th Michigan. Now, when I left here, Wayne, the citizens, including my patients, honored me by giving me this sword, which I carried with me throughout my time in service and brought it home with me. The first part of the war for the 24th Michigan was one mostly in camp. And unfortunately, most of the boys in camp were farmers. They had never been exposed to many of those childhood diseases that city folks had. So measles, mumps were very common, and many of them suffered dearly because of that. In addition, those terrible camp diseases, dysentery, typhoid fever, took their toll on our men quite a bit, and many, many died just before even having a chance to face the rebels in battle. We even had cases of smallpox, which was pretty prevalent at the time, but a very, very devastating disease. So the first part of my career in the Army was really trying to treat these poor men with their diseases. They suffered a great deal. But our first really battle was in December of 1862 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. We suffered a great deal of wounded, and I spent most of my time at taking care of the wounded, including doing amputations that were necessary. In January of 1863, General Burnside tried to march around Richmond but was caught in the mud and the cold and the freezing rains. And so many of our men suffered from a cold exposure and frostbite. Again, very difficult to treat them. But our real test occurred in July of 1863 in that little town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There, we were part of the first day battle. We were marched up into McPherson's Ridge. There were only 463 of us left out of the 1,000 that joined. But in that first day of fierce fighting, 89 of us laid on the field dead. 218 were wounded, and 52 were captured. So by the end of the first day, we had lost 80% of our men in that first day battle. I spent my time in Gettysburg in a field hospital, attending the numerous wounded that were coming into town. It was a horrible, horrible sight. Men were wounded in every known location on their body. The moans, the groans of the wounded, the dying, filled the air. The smell of ether and chloroform filled the air as men continued to have their arms and legs amputated. It was a sight that really was a horrible sight that I've never, ever, ever forgot, and is always with me, even today. My health then began to decline, and by July 25th, after serving more of the wounded in town, I asked for a furlough, and was granted that, but by September my health had not really improved, and I also resigned from the Army. I was 48 at the time when I resigned. I returned back here to Wayne, and fortunately was able to recover my health and continue my practice. My wife was here, my daughter was here. Ida was my only daughter, but Ida will never marry, and therefore I don't have any descendants left here to talk about. My practice was going very well until September 4th, 1883, when I was called home by my Heavenly Father. And here I rest, here with my wife, Clarissa, and my daughter, Ida. And that is my story as Dr. Alexander Collar. But I want to tell you a little story about a very close friend of mine who's here next to you, Dr. Ira Fletcher. Ira was born in Brownstown Township, just south of us here. At age 18, he enlisted in Company K of the 24th Michigan and was quickly promoted to corporal. By December, after the Battle of Fredericksburg, he was promoted further to a 5th sergeant. But on that fateful day in July of 1863 at Gettysburg, he was wounded and captured by the rebels and sent to prison in Richmond. Fortunately, he was able to be exchanged with other prisoners, but his health was very poor at the time, and he was never ever able to really return back to active service with the 24th Michigan until almost a year later in July of 1864. He then was promoted higher up in rank to 1st sergeant and then sergeant major. But by January of 1864, there was only 100 men left from the 24th Michigan. Of the 1,000, only 100 left. And so the unit was sent to Camp Butler, where they would actively recruit more men to fill the ranks of those gone. And he was later promoted to 1st lieutenant. And he will serve the rest of the war, being mustered out of service in June of 1865, and came back home here to Michigan. Here he married his wife, Mary Collins, and they had one child, Edward. But unfortunately, Edward will also die at age 19. And so Ira, like myself, have no descendants. But while here, Ira also took up the study of medicine, and I was happy, very happy to be one of his mentors. He had an office on Main Street, Main and First, and I also had an office on Main Street. But we were very, very close friends. But Ira's health was not very good. On May 9th, 1883, he passed away at a young age of 39. I was 60. But Ira was very close to me, and that is why Ira is close to Clarissa and I. And that's my story of both Ira and Alexander. And I thank you for listening. So we have many stories to tell about the 24th.
Ready? Okay. My name is Anne Elizabeth Stellwagen. I was born in 1807 in Scotland, and my husband was Michael Stellwagen, who was born in 1808 in Germany. We had 8 children, and our 8 children and my mother-in-law and us came over to the U.S. here in 1854. We purchased a farm, which is now where the Ford Motor Company plant stands, and we used to get lots of visits from Mr. Henry Ford, who loved to come out for lemonade. In 1867, I lost my husband, and my son Philip had to take over the farm. My eldest son was George Stellwagen. He was in the construction corps at the Civil War to help rebuild everything that had been destroyed during that war. He later became, at the age of 21, the Nankin Township Treasurer, later went on to become the Wayne County Treasurer, and in 1885 was the Wayne County Sheriff. He opened up the first bank in Wayne, and then he also invested in the Prouty and Glass Carriage Company, which was the biggest supplier of carriages in the United States. He later then went up to St. Ignace, where his sister lived, and tried to open up a bank there. And this is before a bridge was there, so we had to take ferry boats across to get to St. Ignace. Okay. My next son was John Jacob Stellwagen, and he was also a farmer, and he came between Nankin Township and Trenton. I have another son, Augustus Stellwagen, who became a big lawyer over in the city of Detroit, and he is down at Woodlawn Cemetery. My daughter here is Mary Elizabeth Kinnock, and her husband, Charles, was from St. Ignace, so there's that St. Ignace connection. And they lived down here for a while, and then went back up north to St. Ignace. William Stellwagen was my youngest son, and he left Lincoln Township, and he opened up a hardware store in Chippewa County. While I was at my daughter's home in St. Ignace, that is where I passed away, and my son George a couple years afterwards. So they brought us all back to be buried here in Glenwood here, which was our home. Any questions?
I'm representing a soldier from this area. If you might have joined the Civil War, you've been in 24th Michigan. These black hats like this. This was Joel Brace. He was in Company F of the 24th Michigan for 3 months. He's a businessman from this area. I guess he owned a mill. He was an undertaker, carpenter. He's a carpenter from Belleville, born in 1832. And he mustered in. He was 30 years old when he joined the Civil War in the Army. For 3 months, he had disease or something, and he got discharged. And I guess that guy over there told me he got hit by a trolley. That's how he died somewhere. And yeah, imagine going to the war and then you get hit by a trolley. Yeah. That's what he said. Sorry if I'm wrong. But 24th Michigan was, they were bad. When the rebels saw these hats, they say there's GD black hats. They would curse these hats because they were going to die. You know, Michigan soldiers, they were bad. And rebels didn't have the monopoly on crazed fighters and stuff like that. Michigan soldiers saved the Union. When Michigan soldiers marched into Washington, Abraham Lincoln said, "Thank God for Michigan." He had a shirt, you could say that, because we were coming to save this, save the unit. But what I'm carrying is a British Enfield rifle. No question on that. That's British. Most sides use these, but Americans use a Springfield. I got a British Enfield because I do Confederates too. My train. I'm a Texan. But,
Hi, I'm Emma Collins. I was born in Ohio to German immigrant Williams and Augusta Hoops. I married an Irishman, John F. Collins. He was a very well-known attorney and newspaper man. He was the publisher and editor for the Wayne Review. Some of you may have heard of it, but that was many years ago. After he died, in the obituary, it said his wife pluckily carried on with the publication. I did carry on with the publication, and it was later named the Wayne Dispatch. We learned to carry on.
In 1852, my husband came here to survey the land around the Great Lakes of Superior, Huron, and Michigan. In 1858, when the survey was over, he stayed in this area, which was Nankin Township. I was born in a log cabin on Wayne and Palmer, and him and I married in 1860 and lived nearby with 3 children. Our home still stands today on Newburgh and Wayne Road, and I'm sure many of you pass it every day. There used to be beautiful, beautiful chestnut trees that grew there almost 100 feet tall, and our children prospered.
I am reenacting the part of Dr. Ebenezer Bennett. He was a member of the 1st Michigan Engineers and Mechanics during the Civil War. I was born in Maumee, Ohio in 1838, and my family moved to just adjoining Nankin Mills. We bought property there in 1840. During the Civil War, as I said, I was in the 1st Michigan Engineers and Mechanics. Our biggest battle was called Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. You might have heard of that. We have, when I returned, I was a teacher before I went into service. And when I came out, I got kind of bored with being a teacher, so I enrolled into medical school at University of Michigan. And when I came out, the first place they sent me was to the Soldiers and Sailors Home in Grand Rapids. That's where all the Civil War soldiers are being sent for treatment. My second assignment was a place called Eloise Poor Farm. And later to be called Eloise Sanatorium and Eloise General Hospital, and on to what it is now. Back then, the treatment for mental health was a lot different than it is now. Back then, they really didn't know a lot about it. So what they figured was that you had the devil in you or something. They chained you in the rooms, chained you on the walls, or threw you in the corner or whatever, and just let you holler and scream. And you know, the doctors and the we called them inmates back there because they were basically prisoners. Once you got committed to the poor farm or to the sanatorium, you were a prisoner. And they had we all slept together. We all slept in one room, and we slept in a place that was a log cabin called the Black Horse Inn. This is on Michigan Avenue, right? And in future years, that would grow to be 75 buildings and over 900 acres in that area over there. We had our own city within that place. You know, we had a fire department, a police department, and farms and stables and a dairy farm, and we grew our own tobacco and crops. And you know, everybody had a place and had a job to do. In fact, I was the first one to start using musical therapy instead of the club, I guess you'd call it. But you see what Eloise has turned into now. There aren't too many mental hospitals left anymore. My wife and I, we got married 2 days after I enlisted, by the way. We're both buried here. She died in 1922 and I died in 1970. But before you leave, I've got a couple of questions. I know that you know, being a researcher, this thing never leaves my blood. So I got a couple questions for you, and just respond by raising your hand. You know, do you ever wander around and forget what you're doing? Yeah. Okay. Do you ever go into the wrong house and say, "Honey, I'm home"?
Oh, no.
This is for you. Do you ever get the urge to bark or howl during a full moon?
I've seen you do it. I've seen you do it.
Well, if you've answered yes to any of these questions, You need to come back and we'll schedule a follow-up visit right down the street.
Can I get that music treatment instead of the club?
Thank you very much and
Thank you.
enjoy your day.
We're Trey and John and Josephine Hicks. They were sheep farmers. They also did mint corn. It was easy for us to make our money because we had the railroads going north and south, east and west right here. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the area, but we own the land that Fort Wayne is on right now. And that's where we grew all our product and sold. The mint was used for different things. They could break it down to oils and stuff, and they could use it to remedy some of the sicknesses back in that time. In the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's pretty much all
They
I
pretty
really
much
know.
use the mint like, pretty much like how we use like Vicks. They would boil it or, you know, however way they wanted to do it.
Sold their corn for Ford.
No. But they would use a lot of the mints for the sinuses.
They sold
breathing.
it to Henry Ford.
To Henry Ford?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the land. Sorry.
Yeah, the property
As a matter of fact,
bought by.
right where the Ford Motor Company is, if I remember correctly, they used to have a toll booth there. So to cross over to the other side of the toll booth, you had to pay your toll. So,
Really?
yeah. So that's pretty much
Like that was
Bridge.
what I know, and I have no idea why John Hicks was the road name was named after John. Other than maybe he was the best looking one out of the bunch.
There's a bunch of them. Matter of fact, there's another Kenneth Hicks over here, which we
lot
did-
of Hickses?
and it was just really strange watching. You know, walking around before everybody came, and there's another Hicks headstone on the other side behind you guys, and it was just like really neat.
As a matter of fact, we had 7 children too, so
And then it's up from chosen.
and that's why I was bringing this up. Their names were Ben, Emma, Julia, Ellie, Katie, Ralph, and Perry. And Josephine lived to be 84, and Don lived to be 78.
And I commend her because there was no way I would go have 8 children. Now, today, let them.
See a picture of my beautiful wife here when she was a lot younger. Olive here.
When it was alive, yeah.
There's Olive here.
Olive.
Go on.
Olive Chubb.
I'm Henry Farnham.
I married Henry.
Son Olive Chubb Barnard.
Here is Olive's
This is my parents, my father and my mother.
Claude Chubb and Pamela Chubb.
My dad had a farm right at Benoit, Michigan Avenue, where the Walgreens store is now. And we were stationed on the Underground Railroad. So there was a tunnel that went from the river area to the
we actually
barn.
dug a tunnel from the river into the barn.
So to shelter people and help them on their way. And even though I was younger, I was born in 1847 and I died in 1939. So I was still part of that whole big era of that Underground Railroad and helping the people make their escape. And
So hundreds of slaves went through here to their freedom in Canada. And I don't know if you know of a person named John Brown. John Brown had 14 slaves coming from Kansas. And he was on his way to take the slaves to Detroit in Canada. And then he was going from there to Harper's Ferry. And he was going to release all the slaves in Virginia.
it's going to overthrow the government at Harper's Ferry. And that's where that song is, you know, John Brown's body lies a moaning in the grave. He
And
didn't succeed.
when the night he got into Detroit with his 14 slaves, you know who was there? An ex-slave called Frederick Douglass was in town. And Frederick Douglass gave a lecture on slavery in Detroit in 1859. And then after that, John Brown, to the prominent citizens of Detroit,
explained his plan as far as for Harper's Ferry. And so it was the first time that they was made aware of what he was planning on doing. And it's hard to believe, but in 1830 there were still slaves in Detroit. There were both Negro and Indian slaves in Detroit, domestics and that. Even though in 1827 there was an ordinance passed in Detroit that all Negroes had to be registered and had to have a registered certificate that they were free. But like other ordinances, sometimes they're ignored by people in that. And they didn't do that in Detroit for many years. They didn't register. And there was slavery for quite a bit of time.
Henry, just a minute. Maybe we should listen to singing the national anthem.
Oh, sorry.
Play ball. Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought there,
yeah.
I have to start at the beginning again.
No.
No, you just don't want that. But there, what it can be said is that right on Vernoy and Michigan Avenue, hundreds of slaves stayed there overnight as far as traveling to Detroit to get their freedom. You know, and Olive here helped feed and clothe them in that. There. By the way, if you were caught, they had the second anti-slavery thing in 1850 law that it was $1,000 fine. $1,000 fine in 1850 if you were caught assisting a slave in the Underground Railroad. And to think
a house cost $300.
So what did they do? Because people couldn't pay. What did they do then?
throw them in jail.
Okay.
Well, they did so in 1833. There were Virginians that came up to Detroit. There were
Kentuckians.
Kentuckians. I was thinking of Virginia other one, but there were Kentuckians, and they came back and they said a couple of that were Negroes that came to Detroit 2 years before then. They said that they were runaway slaves, and so in Detroit in 1833, they threw them in jail in Detroit. And do you believe that? But they did. Yeah. And there was a Negro woman went in and visited the couple, the woman that was in jail there. That was Thornton Blackburn's wife. And she changed clothes with Mrs. Blackburn. So Mrs. Blackburn, true story, walked out of the jail and then got her right into a boat across what they referred to as the Jordan River. And then she went to the Promised Land, which they referred to as Canada. And what happened, there were riots in Detroit then because of the incident, and they were taking Thornton Blackburn in a carriage, the sheriff was, and he was embarrassed that they got released in that, and he was taken to the steamboat to take Thornton back to Kentucky. And the mob swarmed over the carriage, took Thornton out of the carriage, and put him on a boat over to Canada. He stepped in Canada and he was arrested. And he was thrown in jail over there. But Canada, because they had an anti-slavery law, they wouldn't extradite him to the United States on there. Unfortunately, the mob also critically injured the sheriff with clubs and stones and that. But the anti-slavery sentiment in Michigan grew so strong at that point that in 1837 the Anti-Slavery Society of Detroit was formed, and other societies throughout Michigan were formed, and that's how they supported the Underground Railroad, the anti-slavery societies. So it was a rough life then, and if you got caught, it was very dangerous for you.
There's a lot of dates and times. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Corporal David Leroy Adams of Company C, 24th Michigan Volunteer Infantry. I am more than that, though. I was born in Plymouth, Michigan in August of 1833 to James and Ursula Adams. My dad was a carpenter by trade, and we located with the construction industry. So by the early 1840s, we were in Eaton, Michigan, a developing area southwest of Lansing. By October 2nd, 1849, my dad had passed from dysentery. So with I left to supporting the family, I was led to pick up my dad's trade. By 1858, I had returned to Canton, where I met my first wife, Harriet Stevens. We were married in 1859, and our first child, Cyrus, was born in 1860. Our second child, daughter Charlotte, was born in 1862. With the Civil War being a little more than a year old, Mr. Lincoln called for additional volunteers to fill depleted ranks. And so by July of 62, the 24th Michigan Infantry was called up. As that regimental call was assigned to Wayne County, meetings were held in the communities within Wayne County. On August 5th, a meeting was held in Plymouth to procure enlistments for a new company. On that afternoon on the village green, now Kellogg Park, we came together, 100 volunteers. We stepped forward. Prominent citizens, businessmen of Detroit also stepped forward to pledge payment bounties to each man from his ward who enlisted. This was the first time in Detroit and in Michigan that extra inducements were given. For my young family, this was a godsend. Most of the guys were from Plymouth, 69 men out of 100, 7 from Canton, including myself, 9 from Livonia, 6 from Nankin, and 8 from Salem Township, a community of Washtenaw County, and 1 from Detroit. So on August 5th, 1862, Company C of the 24th Michigan Infantry was formed. At 29 years old, we were mustered into federal service on August 15th, 1862. We left Detroit on the 29th in command of Colonel Morrow of Detroit, who had been authorized by the governor, Austin Blair, to recruit and organize this regiment, and took the route to Washington. Arriving there on the 2nd of September, we remained there until the 30th of that month, missing the Battle of Antietam. Marching for Sharpsburg, we arrived there on the 8th of October, where we were assigned to General John Gibbons' 1st Brigade, 1st Division, 1st Army Corps of the Army of the Potomac. Our assignment was as the Detroit and Wayne County Regiment was to the Iron Brigade. We first saw the Elephant in Fredericksburg on December 12th. After laying all night in our arms, we took on a nuisance battery of Confederate horse artillery south of the town. We saw no major action during the Chancellorsville campaign, but at Gettysburg we went into action with only 496 men, losses of about 60% of our original strength. At 9 a.m. on the first day, we faced Archer's Brigade of Heath's Division of A.P. Hill's Corps. Without loading our weapons, we had empty muskets. We were ordered forward over the hill at the double quick and across Willoughby's Run, where we captured a large number of prisoners being part of General Archer's brigade. We spent the next day, the 2nd and 3rd of July, defending Culp's Hill. From thenceforth, we participated in the rest of the Army of the Potomac campaigns and battles through 1863, and with the opening of the campaigns of 64, we were assigned to the 1st Brigade, 4th Division, 5th Army Corps. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Courthouse, North Anna, Kalapatomi, Cold Harbor, and on to Petersburg. We were not present at Appomattox after Petersburg because we had been reassigned on the 11th of February to a garrison post in Springfield, Illinois. We were there when we were selected as an escort at the funeral of President Abraham Lincoln. He came in on the 3rd of May, and the parade out to Oak Ridge Cemetery was the next day on the 4th. So people had like a 24-hour period, or most of a 24-hour period, to view him laying in state. From the Illinois State House, where he was laid, to Lincoln's home, to the governor's mansion, parade formed, and out to Oak Ridge Cemetery, a distance of a little over 2 miles or so. We were there until the 19th of June when we left for Detroit. We arrived on the 20th, and on the 30th at Fort Wayne, we were mustered out of service, paid off, and disbanded. I returned home to my family in Canton as a 32-year-old soldier, carpenter, once again working in construction jobs. Our youngest daughter, Charlotte, died in 1867 of scarlet fever. By 1870, Harriet and I had had 2 more children and lived in Van Buren. Our son William, born in 1865, daughter Harrietta Etta Lenora in 1868, and John Quincy in 1871. Daughter Mary Elizabeth in 1874, and Ada Jane in 1876. I lost my dear wife in childbirth with Ada's birth in 1876, and I was married to my second wife, Bridget Reed, in 1877. By 1880, we lived in Nankin, Wayne area, where I continued with carpentry work. In 1879, the village initiated a special police force under a village marshal with 3 policemen. I had the opportunity to work in that post as well. From 1900 through 1910, we lived in Nankin, Wayne, before moving back into Wayne proper in 1911. At the age of 78, on April 14, 1912, my body gave out and I was laid to rest here at Glenwood Cemetery on April 17th. There's an irony in that. What happened on April 14, 1912? April 14, 1912. For some reason, when I was putting this together, doing this scripting, I thought, April 14th of all days, the Titanic hit an iceberg. So you got now 2,000 more people dying in the North Atlantic, and it went down officially on the 15th. I thought, April 14th, 1912, no way. I died on that day, along with all those people on that ship. Well, though they died between the 4th, they hit it on the night of the 14th, the ship officially went down on the 15th. So it's like, them and I sunk at the same time.
1826 in New York. So when I came back, when my parents moved over here, we moved to Nankin Township. And I met John J. Palmer. He's my husband, and I call him JJ. So his father was very interesting. He bought a parcel of land, 40 acres, and built a log cabin. The log cabin, if you get in a time machine and go forward, you would come to McDonald's on Palmer and Wayne Road. My last name, Palmer now. So we got married and we moved into my father-in-law's log cabin. And my father-in-law had 10 children. But he only lived to be 41 years old. Can you imagine 10 children? Oh my. So after I got married anyway, we had little William Palmer, and we named him Willie. But very sad, he only lived to be a month and a half years old. But we did go on to have 2 more children. My daughter was born right in the log cabin, and her name is Mary Prudence, named after my mother, Prudence Joy. And so I'm a farmer girl. My husband was a farmer. His father was a shoemaker. And I happened to think of that poem. There was an old lady that lived in a shoe. He was a shoemaker. She had so many children, 10 children, and didn't know what to do. I'm sure she knew what to do with 10 children. She was just always busy changing diapers or whatever. But anyway, I just came from my apple orchard. And sad to say, my husband died at 59, which left me as a widow, 55 years old. So, but I lived to be 80 years old, so I can't complain about that. And we had a lovely life, and that's my story.